Today, we have a presentation on autism and taxes, focusing on the disability tax credit. Our speaker today is David Taylor, and David is a parent of a child on the spectrum who's been running a home-based ABA team for 16 years. David's done extensive research on the financial side of managing a therapy team and has gathered all of this different information from his own experiences and feedback from other parents. There have been a number of these. I think we've hosted these for over 12 years. You've done different presentations. So this is the first year that we've broken the talk into two separate sections. So the presentation today will focus more on the application, and this talk is intended for people who have not applied or need to reapply for the disability tax credit. With that, I want to be able to pass it over to David. Thank you so much for joining us today. And you will be able to share your screen. I will monitor the chat box. If people have questions and they want to remember them, please type them into the chat box and we will get to those at our allotted question time. Thank you again.
Thank you, Brock, and thanks for that introduction. Big thank you to Brock and all his colleagues at Autism BC for all the great works they do, and I do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this evening. And as Brock mentioned, this is the first year that I've split my talk in two. So now we can just take our time and we can talk about the application for the disability tax credit. So if you're coming here tonight and you're looking for advice on how to fill in your tax forms and what you can claim, that's not what we're doing tonight. That talk will come in another week. But tonight, it's just for those people who want to apply for the disability tax credit or reapply. So I'll walk you through the process. If you have done it before, there's a few things that have changed. If anybody wants to watch the closed captioning, it is available on tonight's broadcast. You can just go to more and select subtitles. And there is a handout, and I've put the link in the chat, and I'll do that again at the end. And as Brock said, he will send that in the email as well. So you really shouldn't need to take any notes tonight. So having said all that, we'll get started here. I'm just going to bring up the PowerPoint. And then with any luck, you'll see it on your screen. So it's all about applying for the disability tax credit. So just to let you know where I'm starting from here, I am not a financial professional. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a specialist. I'm just a parent that's been doing this for a long, long time. And this is how I got started. This is my boy. And in this picture, he's about 20 months old. And that's when he was diagnosed with autism. And as I'm sure you can understand, there was just a tsunami of information coming at us at this point. And one of the things that really never occurred to me at the time of diagnosis was taxes and what that might do for us. And I didn't even hear about the disability tax credit for another year or two after the fact. Anyway, many years later, this is the boy now, and a lot of years of tax filings, and we've applied for the disability tax credit for him and was granted. And we had to reapply again last year, and that was successful as well. So the main thing we're talking about tonight is money. So this is behind the disability tax credit, because one of the things I can tell you, every family that has an autism diagnosis in it is going to be feeling financial stress. And it doesn't matter who you are, how much money you make, I guarantee you are feeling stress. And so part of what we're doing is applying for the disability tax credit, and that's going to help the bottom line for you. So the big question is, should you apply right away for the disability tax credit? And this is very much unlike the BC Autism funding, which you may be familiar with. With the BC funding, there's a big rush to get out, get your diagnosis as quickly as possible so you can get some funding. However, for the federal funding, I recommend you take your time here and prioritize what you have to do. And things like taking care of your child, your family, yourself is more important than applying for the disability tax credit. There is no advantage to acting quickly here because anything we're going to do tonight, we'll be able to backdate into the past, and I'll talk more about that later. So there's no rush for this. This is very much take your time and get it done correctly. So why should you apply for the disability tax credit? Well, two main reasons. On the surface, it's a non-refundable tax credit. So that saves you money on your taxes, which is a worthwhile thing. But perhaps more importantly, the disability tax credit acts as a gateway to many other benefits you can get from the federal government. And some of those are the disability tax credit, the child disability benefit, home renovation costs, home buyer's amount, the caregiver amount, the registered disability savings plan, and that's probably the most important one of all, enhanced medical expense claims, autism therapy costs, enhanced child care claims, and the qualified disability trust. Now, I'm not going to be talking about these tonight. If you want to attend my next talk, the level 2, I will be going into all of these in detail. I want to clear up a couple of misconceptions that people have about the disability tax credit. Some people are reluctant to apply. They think perhaps it may affect their child, their schooling, or it'll stigmatize their child. And one of the things you have to know is it's a very private thing. It's between you and the Canada Revenue Agency, and nobody else needs to know about it. The school does not need to know, and in many cases, your child doesn't have to know about it. So there's no reason from that standpoint to not apply for it. And could it affect a future career? Well, no, it can't, because once again, this is private information. And if the affected person is an adult going for a job, there is nothing that says they have to disclose this information to an employer. Another consideration is, will this be clawed back if income or assets increase? And no, the answer to that one is absolutely not. The disability tax credit itself is just simply a deduction from your taxes. It doesn't actually count as income. So it's not anything that they can use to claw back any benefits you may get in BC. So diving into the process, the first question that we have to ask is your child disabled? And the answer to this one is no. Your child is not disabled until the government says they are disabled. So step one of the process is applying to the government for disability status. And for that, we're going to use the form T2201, which is also known as the Disability Tax Credit Certificate. And that's what we're going to be talking about in detail this evening. So the form itself is a 16-page form, and it can look very intimidating. But if you go through it in slow time and do it correctly, it should not be an undue burden. But it is very important to do it correctly. It's very important to make sure that important information is not left out. And this is the exact opposite of the BC funding. So we don't need to rush through the process to get funding. We'll always be able to go back in time to when the disability affected the individual and claim whatever you have coming from the federal government. There's a lot more information about this form in the handout, and I would suggest you give it a read. We'll go through some of the details later on, but for the in-depth guide, please read the handout. One of the other concepts we want to talk about tonight is the effects versus diagnosis. And the diagnosis itself is not the holy grail when it comes to applying for the disability tax credit. What CRA is interested in is how does this impact the daily life of the individual? And it's the exact opposite, once again, from BC, where BC is completely dependent on the diagnosis in order to get funding, whereas the federal government looks at how does that condition affect an individual in their daily living. And to give you an example here, let's talk about something like multiple sclerosis. It's a devastating condition for many Canadians, but in its very early stages, the symptoms are very slight, and an individual may very well go ahead and work and go to school, do whatever they need to do, and it's not really a disability. However, as the condition progresses, the effects on the daily living do change such that the person is becoming disabled, and that is the same case with autism. So we're looking at what does autism do to the individual that makes the individual disabled. So some highlights of the form. What you're going to do is get a qualified practitioner to certify that the individual has, and I quote, a severe and prolonged impairment. What is a qualified practitioner? It could be a doctor, it could be a nurse practitioner, psychologist, or in limited cases, could be a speech language pathologist. Now, the effects on the individual can be mental or physical. And prolonged, the definition means at least 12 months. So in the case of autism, what qualified practitioner should you see? The obvious candidates are pediatrician, psychologist, or a psychiatrist. Now, what about a general practitioner? So what I would say is that depends. What you want to do is you want to go and see a doctor who has done many of these before and is familiar with filling out the T2201 form. It's not reasonable to go to a walk-in clinic and see a doctor who's never met you or your child before and expect them to do a good job filling out the form. On the other hand, if you have a established relationship with your GP, if your GP is comfortable filling out this form, they understand what they're filling out, or perhaps you live in a remote area and that's the only option you have, then a general practitioner is quite satisfactory. If you want to find out who would be good to do this for your child, this is where you need to get in touch with your local organizations, whether it's chat groups, Facebook groups, network with other parents, other individuals to see who are the practitioners in your area who are familiar with this, familiar with autism, and know how to fill out the form. Ideally, what you will have is an established relationship with a specialist, and that makes the process so much easier. And for the psychologist, he can only certify the mental functions portion, and I will explain a little bit more about that later. So is there a charge for filling out the form? Well, the answer is possibly. And a lot of this depends on your relationship with the practitioner. If you have an established relationship with a pediatrician, they know the child well, all the reports have been there, the fee may be nominal. However, this is not something that they are reimbursed by MSP for, and it is quite reasonable to have them charge a fee for this. A few $100s might be reasonable. A few thousand is probably not reasonable. And a practitioner may spend an hour or even longer with you, depending on whether or not they know the individual, to complete this form. So it is an investment in time. Keep in mind that if they do charge you, get a receipt, and you can claim that as a medical expense on your taxes. So what CRA has done in their bureaucratic wisdom is they found a way to define what a disability is. And so what they do is they look at what they call the basic activities of daily living, those being speaking, hearing, walking, elimination, which is bowel or bladder functions, feeding, dressing, and mental functions necessary for everyday life. Now, with respect to autism, you can see how for a profoundly affected individual, certainly a good number of these could apply. For a lot of kids or people on the spectrum, generally speaking, it's going to be the mental functions necessary for everyday life. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So a medical doctor, either a pediatrician or a psychiatrist, can certify all of these basic activities, but the psychologist can only certify the mental functions, which may be all you need. So what is the definition of a severe impairment? So they say the individual must be what they call markedly restricted. And that means they're unable to perform one or more of the basic activities, or it takes them an inordinate amount of time to complete the task. And by inordinate, CRA means more than 3 times. So what we're doing is we're comparing an individual against the same age neurotypical peer. So if it takes them 3 times as long to get dressed, then that is a severe impairment in that category. You can also, there's also a definition of significantly restricted in 2 or more of the basic activities. So if an individual has, I'll give you a speaking as an example. So if your child is completely mute, not a single word to be said, then that would meet a marked restriction under the speaking category. On the other hand, if the individual has restricted language, perhaps 1-word answers, 1 word to ask for dinner, or any other restrictions, that would be a significant restriction. So a significant restriction in speaking coupled with a significant restriction in mental functions put together would meet the definition of a severe impairment. So it's really important with this form that you assume personal responsibility. You own this form, not the doctor. And what you want on this form is the worst case scenario for your child on their worst day. And if you're not getting what you need, then go to a different doctor. So it's important that you not take a passive role here. And this is the point that a lot of people go wrong. They go to a doctor and say, here's a form, fill it out. The doctor doesn't know the individual, signs off the form as quickly as possible. Maybe the information is sloppy, maybe there's incomplete work, and the parents don't review the information and they send it in. That's just asking for CRA to say no. And then you're on this great journey of what do you do now? Do you appeal it? Do you redo it? And it would have been much easier to do it correctly in the first place. So if you get to the end of this process and you don't like what is on the form, if it doesn't look right, then don't send it in. You're much better off to start all over again. Now, an important concept here is, when did the impairment begin? And ideally, it would be at birth, but sometimes it's a difficult thing to achieve that. And different doctors have different ideas about this one. And what you may hear from them is not necessarily wrong. Now, in the case of my child being diagnosed at 20 months and being a very difficult baby, it was very easy to justify that his impairment began at birth because we knew it's a lifelong neurological disorder from birth. On the other hand, if you're going in there at age 25 and you're holding down a job, it would be a very difficult sell, both for the doctor and for CRA, to believe that the condition began at birth. And one of the reasons it's so important is the date of impairment is the date that you can begin to claim the disability tax credit and backdate it. So you can go back up to 10 years, not just for the disability tax credit, but the Canada Child Benefit, the Registered Disability Savings Plan, caregiver amount. So it could amount to a lot of money. And some families hear from other families that, oh, all you got to do is tell the doctor it's from birth and just tell them to put it down, it'll be okay. Once again, not that simple. And you certainly don't want to be telling the physician what they should or should not be putting it down. You'll certainly give them information, but they're the ones that are going to certify when the impairment began. And CRA may look at this and go, well, for example, a baby is a baby is a baby. They have certain needs, and a baby with autism has the same needs as a neurotypical baby, so there's no impairment there. Physicians may also look at a higher functioning individual, and part of their diagnostic criteria is to go back in time to look at when did differences appear. It may be quite possible for someone who goes in and gets diagnosed at the age of 7, the psychiatrist, psychologist may be looking at when did this impairment emerge. And they may go back to 2 or 3 years of age, and they may be able to justify that. What is not reasonable, on the other hand, is for the doctor to say that the impairment began on the day that you walked in to have this form filled out. That's not reasonable. So they may have different ideas, and I wouldn't want to argue with them. I've heard a lot of different points about this one, and frankly, they're all correct. But if the doctor is going to say it started on this date, then perhaps you might want to look for a different doctor to take care of it. And this is one of the reasons having a relationship with the doctor is so important. So at the very least, it should be backdated. So is the eligibility based on the diagnosis? No, it is not, but it is helpful for CRA to look at the restrictions. So, for example, if you are in BC and your child is on the wait list to go to Sunnyhill for the diagnosis, that's not the diagnosis that you need to go to the federal government. If the pediatrician has diagnosed the child with autism, that is the diagnosis, and that is all you need at this point. What does CRA look at for mental functions? They look at adaptive functioning, memory, and problem solving, goal setting, and judgment taken together. And we will look at these in detail. And what's really important for each one of these is that you're going to have specific examples for your doctor. So when the doctor asks you about a certain thing, you need to have an answer ready for him. Either the individual cannot do it, they are unable to perform it, perhaps it takes them 3 times as long as a peer the same age, or perhaps the individual has difficulty with the task. The first one is adaptive functioning. And for this is self-care, such as attending to personal hygiene, health and safety, initiating and responding to social interactions, and common transactions such as grocery shopping or paying a bill. Now here's a screenshot from the T2201 form, and under adaptive functioning, firstly, the doctor selects a severity level. I wish there were some good definitions to pass on to you, but there isn't. Underneath that, the physician is going to ask you about each one of these, and you need to have an answer ready. So, for example, the doctor may say, does the individual have any problems adapting to change? And if the answer is yes, you need to have specific examples for them. Perhaps it's a medical report, perhaps there's some behavioral things, but you need to have an answer ready for the doctor. For example, recognizing danger and risk to their safety. Perhaps the individual has a tendency to step right out into traffic without looking. The individual cannot be left unattended. The first one there, adapting to change. My son was like that. He was very difficult if things had to change. We had to have special programs, visuals, timings, language to use for him. This was very much something that affected him. Memory includes the ability to remember simple instructions, basic personal information such as the date of birth, address, and any other material of importance and interest. Again, from the 2201 form, each individual question down there, you should be ready to answer the doctor as he goes through it and asks you about each one. Something like remembering simple instructions. Perhaps the individual is told before you get in the bath, check the water temperature. And if they can't do that, then that's definitely a restriction for memory. For judgment, problem solving, and goal setting taken together, some examples would be complying with prescribed treatments and selecting weather appropriate clothing. And from the form, once again, from top to bottom, the category, the severity level, and then individual sections. And you need to have the answer for the doctor. Having a look at the second one there, make and carry out simple day-to-day plans. Can the individual get up in the morning, get clean clothes, eat breakfast, take a lunch, and school supplies? And these are all answers for the doctor. So before you get going, if you do not have the My CRA account, I would strongly recommend that you get it. There's different ways you can sign into it, but it's much quicker to upload documents. You can look at your tax entitlements. You can look at the disability status, as well as auto-filling tax slips. It's very handy if you have not done it. And prior to applying, I would recommend you read the Autism and the T2201 handout. And it's written by a parent for parents. And if you miss it today, it can be downloaded at asdfunding.com. Now, there's a very useful tool, and this is very much an optional step. But as you're trying to educate yourself about this form, if you go to the Access RDSP website, and the link is in your handout, they have the disability tax credit tool to lead you through the process. And this can be especially helpful if you are using a doctor who is not familiar with the form. And it leads you all the way through the process, shows you all the basic categories, answers all the questions, which leads you through to the very end. And then when you get to the end, you can print out a letter for the doctor, as well as the list of activities that would affect the individual. Now, if you want to know how to find the T2201 form, it's very easy. You just Google it, and it will be the first thing to pop up. So new for last year, they now have a digital application. So if you click on that link, it will take you to the digital application. And if you click on that link, it will give you the paper copy. Some doctors who have been doing this for a very long time may prefer the paper copy, as this was what they've been doing for many years. If I'm going to the appointment, what I would do is I would have both available. I would have the link for the doctor to do the digital application, and I would also have a paper copy printed out. So why would you use the digital application? It's less likely to miss important information. The digital application leads the doctor through the process, especially important for some doctors who may not have seen this before. And you're absolutely welcome to try the digital application yourself. This will give you a chance to anticipate the questions that the doctor will ask you, and it will give you a chance to have your answers ready in the proper sequence. So as you go into the appointment, if you're well prepared, you're going to have a few pages of notes. You're going to have bullet points for each question. And your preparation is going to go a long way to having a successful conclusion to this. So here is the digital application. I'll just lead you through a few sections. I'll skip all the first bit where you're just entering information about the individual. This is what the physician would be filling out. Now you can see here that there's a list of diagnoses that the doctor can select. Now, I did mention earlier that you don't need a diagnosis, but I would recommend that you go there with one. You can see on this page, there is a section for other, but it's going to sell much better to CRA if you actually have a diagnosis and the doctor can enter the year of the diagnosis. So going on to the next section, they're going to ask if the patient takes medication or if they use any devices to assist them. And you're also listing whether or not the person receives any therapy to help them out. In this case, we'll put down ABA therapy. There's an opportunity to answer about what kind of one-on-one support does the individual need. And in this case, we're going to tick off adult supervision at home and additional support from the staff at school. So after doing that, we're going into the categories of mental functioning, starting with adaptive functioning. You're going to select a severity level. And these are the questions that I showed you earlier. And these are the ones that the doctor will ask you about. And it would be very helpful to have answers for him when he asks you the question. So we'll just tick one off today. And then we can go on to memory. And it's the same process. Select the severity level. And there's a few basic questions. Examples would be very helpful to give the doctor as well. And then there's the judgment, problem solving, and goal taken together. Severity level, the questions, and then we'll go on to the next one. So I'll just pause the video here. Now the next question is whether or not the patient is unable to perform these functions by themselves or takes an inordinate amount of time compared with someone of similar age without an impairment. And if you remember, this is what I told you earlier, the definition of the severe impairment. So the first answer is a severe impairment. And remember that the answer for inordinate is 3 times as long, or if the patient has difficulty. But ideally, the first one will apply. And is this the case all or substantially all of the time? And the answer is yes. And you're going to put down when did it start. And this is important because, as we talked about earlier, this is going to guide CRA when they decide when the impairment began. And this is important to you because of money. The next question is, has the impairment in mental functions necessary for everyday life lasted or expected to last for a continuous period of at least 12 months? And the answer for this one is yes, must be yes. So remember, when you get to the end of that process, the doctor is going to print off the PDF. He's going to sign it and give it back to you. And there's a section of there that you have to fill out, which is section A. It's your responsibility to fill that out. Make sure the physician has signed the form. And it's very important that you make a copy for yourself. Why? You're going to forget what's on this form. If CRA comes back and denies you, it would be very helpful to know what information did they see in the first place. If you're going to reapply for the disability tax credit, it's very helpful to know what information you gave them in the first place. So please make a copy. After the form is done, you're going to mail the form or upload it on to my CRA account. And it's very simple. You log on, you look for upload documents, you do a search for the T2201, and it will lead you through the process of uploading it. So it's much faster. So preparation is really the key here. Anticipate the questions you're going to get in the interview. Explore the individual's deficits. Review the history and signs of your child's autism. When did they first become evident? All the better if it's actually on a medical form or a report that may have been generated in the past. It's very important information. Don't walk into the appointment and expect the doctor to spoon feed you. Don't go in there, just say, fill out this form, and I want to walk away and get this. You're probably going to get a substandard result if that's the case. When you go to the appointment, you want to take your bullet point notes. If you have a diagnosis, that would be very helpful. Take along the link to the digital T2201. Take along a paper copy in case that's what the doctor wants. And the optional one, if you want to take along the information from Access RDSP, which includes a letter to the healthcare provider, that would be helpful as well. And that's more in the case of an inexperienced doctor who has not necessarily seen this before. So on the form, what do you complete? You have to complete Part A. So we'll have a look at it. So Section 1 of Part A is telling CRA about the person with the disability. Section 2 is about telling CRA about who is going to claim the disability amount. So in the case of an individual who is a minor with no income, they have no use for the disability amount. So parent is going to claim the amount on behalf of the child. Just to keep things easy here, I would recommend that you put down the name of the higher income parent. There are some reasons for that I won't get into, but that will give you the best refund over the years. Just list that down. You can change it later if you need to, but to keep it simple, put the name of the higher income parent. It asks for some other information about what support you give the child. And if your child lives with you, you really don't have to overthink this one. You don't have to write a long paragraph about the kind of support you give your child. You can just simply say, you know, the child lives with you and is completely dependent on you. And that's all the information you need to put in that box. Don't forget to sign at the bottom as well. That's not good to go through all that and have CRA send it back after 3 months because you haven't signed it. In Section 3, it will ask you about previous tax return adjustments. So this one right here, you can tick the box and ask CRA to automatically adjust all your previous tax returns. And I would strongly recommend you tick yes. They will look back based on the date of impairment and how many years you can claim the disability tax credit, and they will, in due course, send you that money. And that's the easy way to do it. And once again, sign. So you can send it in using the MyCRA account, or you can mail it. When should you send in the form? I would recommend you not send it in with your tax return. You can do it. However, sending this form in with your tax return will delay the processing of your tax return until the T2201 is settled. If you are entitled to a refund for anything else, you are not going to get it until your tax return is finalized. I would file a normal tax return, and when the T2201 is approved, you can go back after the fact and request additional refunds. But anything away from the tax season, and I would just send in the 2201 form right away. Make sure you make a copy of it. Now, should you have a professional do the form for you? Some people feel that they need an accountant to do this for them, and you don't need this at all. If you read through the form, there is nothing financial on that form. Nothing. There is no numbers, nothing. So there's no reason to have your accountant do this for you. If you Google disability tax credit, you're going to have a lot of websites popping up for these disability agencies. And they look wonderful. They look awesome. They're going to tell you things like You don't have the expertise to do this on your own. You need our expert guidance to complete this form. If you try and send it in on your own, it's going to be denied. So let us do it for you. We are the experts. And I can tell you that they don't bring anything to the table here. The amount of money they charge is extraordinary. I've heard figures from 30% to 50% of whatever you've got coming back from the government. And for some people, that can be over $10,000, perhaps even more. Please stay away from these. There's nothing that they can help you with. It's between you and your doctor and filling in a basic form. If you need a friend to help you with it, so be it, but please stay away from this one. What do you do next? Well, this is the hard part where you have to wait. And it could take 3 months, hard to say. The CRA website says they will process it within 8 weeks, 95% of the time. So what happens if they come back and your child is not approved for the disability tax credit? You have to ask the question, why? And it's important to be honest with yourself here. Have a look at the form. You've kept a copy of it. And look at the information that the doctor has ticked off, the comments he's made, and you go, did he do a good job of it? Was the disability soft pedaled? Is it not accurate? Or did the government just not do a good job of processing it? And it's very important to go through this examination yourself. It could be that CRA just wants additional information from your doctor. That could delay the process by a couple of months. You also have the ability to file an objection within 90 days, and the instructions are on the T2201 form. So what you're going to do, if you can honestly say that the information on the form was accurate and it portrayed the worst day for the individual, then by all means, go ahead and file a notice of objection. And what it does, it goes to a different tax office, it looked at by a different person in CRA, and they will have a fresh look at it. On the other hand, if your answer is, well, maybe the doctor did not do a good job with his form, the best thing you can do is just rip it all up, start all over again with a new doctor. If you are approved, on the other hand, well, congratulations. What you're going to get from CRA is a letter telling you that the individual has been approved for the disability tax credit. And there's some basic information here saying what the tax years for the disability tax credit is valid for and when you need to reapply. Very important information on here. Make sure you keep this letter. You're going to forget in the future when the disability tax credit does expire. Now, you can get this information on My CRA, but please hang on to this letter anyway. It's got information that you'll need to use. I've seen so many families, their kid's about to become an adult, and they're going, huh, did this disability tax credit expire or not? Please keep this on file. So what is on the approval letter? They're going to tell you the tax years that the disability tax credit is valid for. For example, the tax year is 2015 to 2024. And the earlier year indicates how far back you can make a claim. And the last year indicates that is the last year of validity. And during that year, you will need to reapply. And when I say reapply, you're going to have to go through the whole process all over again. You're going to have to see a doctor, fill out the form, and send it in. Hopefully by this time you're an expert and the process is a lot easier. So knowing what we know now, we can look at this letter and we can see the highlighted portion where it says 2006 to 2021. So those are the valid years for the disability tax credit. So in the year 2021, you will need to start the process all over again and apply for the disability tax credit. What does CRA grant in terms of timeline? All I can say is it varies. Often what they will do is they will say that a child is valid right up to the point they become an adult, in which case they need to reapply then. Perhaps if CRA thinks that it's a pretty weak case for a disability, maybe they'll only grant 1 or 2 years and you have to reapply. Now, how can we make the process a little bit easier? First and foremost, you should establish a relationship with a specialist. And that's going to make everything I talked about this evening so much easier. You know, in my case, just late last year, my son needed to reapply, and we went to his psychiatrist who had been seeing him for many years and knew him well. We didn't even have an appointment. He simply gave us the form. He filled it out on his own, and next thing you know, we had the form in our hand. That would be the ideal scenario. If you can do that, if they know your child well enough, it makes it much, much easier. If you're not lucky enough to have that, the next thing is do your homework and do your prep work. Go into the appointment ready for it, and it'll make it all much easier to do. So what comes next in the process? You can attend my level 2 talk, which I'm giving coming up in the near future, and maybe Brock will have more information about that. This is where I lead you through the process of how do you put this on your tax form? What can you claim? How far back can you go? How is the process done? And that's kind of the fun talk, because a lot of people come away from that one going, wow, I just made $10,000 tonight. And there's quite a bit more to claim than you might think about. So I'm happy to take any questions. I'm happy to hang around as long as people want to chat. My email's up there if you have any feedback for me, if you want to tell me how the process went for you or your family. I'd love to hear about it. I've been talking to parents now for about 12 years, and I've learned a lot of talk. So please let me know how it goes for you. And let's close this down now, and I'll take any questions. Maybe there's some in the chat.
Thank you so much, David. Yeah, there's a few questions in the chat. One, when you go to the doctor visit, should you be bringing your child or youth who's on the spectrum to the doctor visit?
Depends. If the doctor knows the child very well, then not necessarily. If you're going to a doctor who has never met your child before, then yes, you will have to take them. I doubt very much a doctor is going to fill out the form never having met his patient, and he's about to certify that the individual has a disability. In my case, from the last one, the specialist didn't want to see him. He knew him well enough that we could just do the paperwork remotely.
Okay, nice. And then when you are refilling out the application, whether it's you're filling it out again based on your renewal year, or if you have to reapply, that information should be the same, or like the date of impairment should be the same. You shouldn't change information? Because they'll have the previous one on record, or you'll have to change and expand on information.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, good question. In most cases, it should be a seamless process. If the individual has qualified since 2010, and they go for the application, the CRA should just look at it as a continuation. And in most cases, that's exactly what they'll do. Unless there's a large gap there, they'll probably treat it as a continuous disability. Even if you're slightly late on it, they'll probably send you the letter saying, these are the tax years that you can claim. And in most cases, it will be a seamless process.
Okay. And then there was one question that came on that you had answered, that the higher earner in the family should be able to claim the dependents under themselves on their taxes. Would that change if you had multiple children who were on the spectrum, or
No.
you would?
No,
Okay.
no, it wouldn't change at all. I would recommend that, even for 2 children, put down the higher income parent. And this is a lot of what I'm going to be talking about for the level 2 talk, who should be claiming it. But for now, for the purpose of the form, I would just put down the higher income parent for both children.
Okay. And is that the person that needs to sign the form in those 2 places that you said you must sign the form here?
Yeah.
It has. Okay.
Yeah. Now, I mean, you can, at a later point, go back and change this to the other parent if you need to. But to keep it simple, just put the higher income parent for simplicity's sake.
Okay. And you've shared that summary page with us that you had posted into the chat. So we won't get the exact slides from the presentation, but all the information in those slides and all your speaking points are on that handout, the T2202 guide PDF there.
Yeah, the guide will go into a lot more detail than I did tonight. I mean, they'll have the recording as well to look at, but there's a lot of great information in that guide, and I recommend that everybody give it a read cover to cover before going through the process.
Okay.
Hi, sorry, just a quick question. Sorry to interrupt you. So just on that note, like if we had filed it under the parent with the lower income, because we didn't know, like, is it possible to switch it? Is it worth it? Like, and then because it's going to revert back to the mother in like a year and a half.
I understand completely, and this happens to a lot of people, and it's actually not a big drama. Chances are on your tax form, you can just select the other individual and it will go through just fine. To be completely correct, though, what you could do is mail a letter to CRA going, could you please switch it to the other parent, and just have both parents sign. And it should be just that simple. No complicated forms, just a letter saying, this is the child, this is the SIN number, this is the parent we put down, and we made a mistake. It should be the other one, and send it in, and that'll change it over.
Oh, I see. So you don't have to go through the whole process with the application again.
Oh, no. You certainly don't have to go through that again. No, it's very simple. Just do a letter. I know some people have actually done it on the phone, where they've talked to CRA and they've had both parents on the line, and they say, can you just switch it to the other parent? And go, yeah, no problem. You absolutely don't have to go through the whole application again.
Okay, and sorry, just one more question about that. And so if we do that, then do you think they will give you retroactive pay based on the higher parent's income?
So if I understand the question correctly, if you fill out the T2201 form, whichever parent you list on that form, and if you say that you want the previous tax payments adjusted, they're going to do that based on the form that you sent in. You could go back and request a change, and it may not make any difference at all. If both parents are actually taxpayers, in other words, your total tax is going to be more than zero, it may not actually make a difference at all. We're simply suggesting the higher income spouse, just in case the lower income spouse with the deductions and credits takes the tax, total tax down to zero, in which case there's no point in having the non-refundable tax credit because it will not reduce the tax below zero. And that's the only reason we're suggesting the higher income spouse.
Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
And Lori had one question here that said, my child was diagnosed in August. He's 13, considered higher functioning. In your experience, would we still be approved? And I think we would look at support needs instead of functioning.
You know, you really still have to go through the guide, the handout. It will talk about that. But print out a copy of the T2201 form and look at every one of those functioning questions that we went through today. And ask yourself, do any of these apply to your child? Do they have a problem with social interaction? Do they exhibit appropriate social behavior? Do they know how to, are they aware of stranger danger? Or do they make good choices in people to trust? Do they need supervision? So go through every single one of those questions and ask yourself, how does this apply to my child? And a lot of people with higher functioning autism do in fact qualify for the disability tax credit. It just takes a little bit more thought and a little bit more effort into answering the questions correctly. So you really got to do your homework on this one.
Thank you. And the second tax talk that you had mentioned a few times, currently registration for that is full for us. We do have a wait list, so any handouts that we have are shared with people. Also, after the presentation starts, I do go in, depending on how many people join, and then I invite the wait list afterwards. So I would recommend signing up for the wait list, and then at least we have your email and we know that you still want the follow-up information from the second presentation.
The other thing I might mention as well, since that talk is full, I am doing one for the Autism Support Network, and I believe there are spots open there. So if you go to autismsupportbc.ca, go to their events, you should be able to sign up for it there.
I'll put the link in the follow-up email to that talk as well. And then we have one last question here. If the parents are separated, can both parents claim this disability tax credit, or can only one parent?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And this one gets complicated. There is quite a few tax entitlements, and I'll be talking about that on my next talk. But the disability tax credit itself is treated like an asset when it comes to parents who are separated or divorced. And it should be part of the holistic settlement. They look at everything. They look at your income, who's working, how much support payments, and it should also be decided in an appropriate settlement who is going to claim the disability tax credit. For example, if the father is working, he has the higher income, it might be better for him to claim the disability tax credit, and this would be taken into account when it comes to calculating support payments. So it should be all put together. And a good lawyer should be able to manage that for you.
Well, thank you so much again for your insights. I'm still very amazed that this was not like an area of study or focus that you had, that you were like, I really want to know the most about this to be able to get back everything that the government owes you and your loved ones and your family, and that you give your time to be able to come and share with others to help benefit them. Thank you for sharing your email as well. If people have follow-up questions, we can help direct them to you, as well as the Autism BC team and the ASN team as well, help answer different questions and put things together. We do have more Autism BC talks and information sessions and presentations that are coming out. You can always check Autism BC/events for upcoming information sessions and talks. Thank you everyone for attending today, and I will be sending a follow-up email with the links and the resources. When we process the video, I'll have a hidden link that you can go back and look at, and I'll link the handout back into that as well. Thanks so much, and have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.